watched my recorded lecture video on the cyber campus. I tried for the first time last time, so I recorded 20 minutes video just for test, and I uploaded it. So I hope everyone can watch the video. The one technical problem about uploading the video on the cyber campus was that there was specific required field I should put, that is the minimum required time of watching. So I set up that as 1 minute, which means that for that first 1 minute, you cannot going forward the tape of the film. So you need to watch at least the first 1 minute for every lecture video. Then after that, you can just going forward and backward of this video. Understand that? So that's one very small technical problem, but you can just spend 1 minute, and after that, you can just go to any kinds of place you want to watch again from my lecture video. So you can freely study about the previous lectures by yourself. And as I already told you, it does not count attendance rate. So for many times you can watch the video, but it does not count for your attendance rate. Even if you never watch the video, it doesn't matter. So you can just choose watching video or not just by yourself. Right? So I will continue to talk about why I mostly stress out the importance of studying this international economy stuff and the current issues of the international business and economic stuff based on the perspective of economics. So the last time I listed up several really important global financial or economic crises history from our history and stress out one of the main crises in the East Asian region that I experienced when I was a teenager. So this 1997 crisis in South Korea and maybe Thailand, Indonesia, or Malaysia changed the life of my family and my friend's family and the other's family in South Korea a lot. And the one of the things that I would like to stress out from my personal story was last time, it is really, really strongly correlated between each economic agent, personal life, and the bigger macroeconomic environment in every time of the period. So we'll come again this page after studying this one. So this is the time of globalization, as everyone definitely aware of that. But the things getting more complicated as time goes by, because the globalization is the main theme in nowadays, but the inside structure of this globalization looking a little bit tricky to understand. So expansion of international trade is always happening. So we can export and import more goods and services than the previous time. But the trade pattern has been changed a lot from 1980 to maybe 2020 or something like that. So in detail, in 1980 to 1990. So did you guys take the international trade course in your major? International trade. So are you guys pretty familiar with some notable international trade theory, like Heckscher-Ohlin or the classical comparative advantage theories or something like that? No. Okay. All right. So no one is okay. Yeah. So in this period, kinds of trade theory like Heckscher-Ohlin or maybe classical theories, something like this, were pretty much popular because the most of trade pattern were country versus country. It means that all the process of manufacturing goods and services or even exporting our labor was done inside one country, from collecting natural resources to making intermediate goods to finalize your goods to be exported. All of this process of production was done inside one country until the real globalization happens since 1990. After 1990s, some bigger companies were the main player in the internet trade activity, you can definitely be heard about the multinational firms. Maybe Coca-Cola or maybe McDonald's, maybe IBM or Amazon. These kinds of firms are definitely having some nationality. For instance, we all know that the McDonald's is an American firm, but more than 90% of total revenue of McDonald's is happening outside of the United States, which means that they are not American firm anymore. Their process of production, maybe Coca-Cola or maybe IBM or maybe Samsung Electronics, their kinds of structure or production pattern or production procedure are really global. Have you ever heard about the smile curve? Right, so we can study about some smile curve. So this is process of production, and this one is value added. So you can think about this product, the iPhone. I'm iPhone lover, so I never bought any of Google-based, Android-based phone. And do you know where this iPhone was made? Both are correct. So if you go to, I don't know which part they are written.
It says design in California.
Yes, right. So they designed in Cali, but manufactured in China. So which nationality of this iPhone is? It's really confusing, right? So we can make some kinds of the full process. We can track of the production process of this iPhone. First of all, in this part, with really high value added or very high technology, they are designed first, right? Where? In the United States. Oops, sorry. And after that, they need to collect some intermediate good, like memory, semiconductor, or display, or some glasses. These kinds of intermediate good production, maybe Korea, maybe Taiwan, or maybe the other Asian countries. So Samsung Electronics is most popular semiconductor provider to iPhone. Even they are competing with the Apple in the market of the final cell phone market, right? But they are the biggest semiconductor provider to their rival company. And after that, one country or maybe two manufacture all the intermediate good to complete their final version of the iPhone. Maybe China, or in recent days, the Vietnam is the rising country to have this rule. After that, these final goods produced in the China should be shipped to many markets, right? To the European market, to the African market, to South Asian continent market. So the logistics needed. So which country can be participating in this process of logistics? Usually they use, in the case of the iPhone, the Japan is the biggest country who has many bigger ships to ship their final goods of the iPhone to the European continent or something. and maybe Netherlands, or maybe France. These kinds of countries are participating in the logistics part. Then they go up to again to the United States because they need to some marketing. Everyone loves the advertisement of the iPhone in each version of that, and the San Francisco headquarters is definitely designing how they should advertise their new version of the iPhone. So this is going to the United States again. So how about the whole kinds of picture of this process is kinds of smile, right? So this is why this is called the smile curve. So the smile curve is pretty popular concept in any of final good production in the manufacturing industry, because the design concept or the marketing process will produce higher value added, like just having manufacturing final good or providing some intermediate goods for the final good process, or just shipping or the logistics. They will have the lower level of the value added as the process of production going forward. So this smiling curve has one unique characteristic, which is that no one country can make the whole process by itself. They need cooperation with each other. If the United States decide to produce all the intermediate goods and the final goods by themselves within the territory of the United States, then what would be the price of the iPhone? It should be more than $2,000 or $3,000, because the labor cost in the United States is much higher than the China or Vietnam. So they need to minimize production costs by cooperating with each other. Maybe to be provided some intermediate goods from Korean market, Korean firm like Samsung or LG Display, and they will heavily use the cheaper labor cost in the bigger country, emerging market like China, India, or Vietnam here, because this is the most labor-intensive process of the production. This is really capital-intensive, and this is also very capital-intensive. So if they have enough capital, then they can minimize their production cost. So they will do this thing and that thing by themselves, while all the other process will require higher level of labor input. They outsourcing to Korea, Taiwan, China, or maybe Japan. So one lesson from this smile curve that we can get is, in order to make one simple product like iPhone, we need a lot of countries, right? It is called the vertical integration. With Apple, iPhone, from this part, this whole process with different countries, but they are definitely integrated with this iPhone, right? So this is a really different picture than 1980s or 90s. We didn't have this kind of production process when I was born, 1982. But now this is really common phenomenon or common procedure to make a good final good and sell it to the world market. So this is called vertical integration. Within one product, even with the iPhone, so many countries are integrated in the supply chain. So now we can't tell anymore about the trade pattern based on country versus country framework. So Heck-Shorten model or the new classical trade theory, we cannot apply these kinds of old version of trade theory anymore, because we can observe this trade pattern is really common and widespread to most of goods and services you are consuming right now. Not only iPhone, but maybe iPad, or maybe this microphone, or maybe this screen. So many countries are involved in producing these kinds of things with this system. So this is one unique feature that we should talk about across the whole classes this semester. So the value chain or supply chain is now really global, as we see here, and they are vertically integrate each other. Countries are vertically integrate each other. So this trade pattern needs new explanatory power or new explanation tool to understand correctly.
Can I ask why we cannot apply the comparative advantage theory to that multinational corporation example?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let me take one example of iPhone again. Based on our comparative advantage, you can either have some advantage, either capital or labor, in our basic theory. So if you are capital abundant or labor abundant. So if you're country A, if you're country B, if you are more relative to country B, if you are relatively more capital abundant, then you have a comparative advantage in capital intensive good, right? How about maybe some finance or maybe some heavyweight industry like making ship or automobile industry? If you have more labor abundant than the country A, then you are having a comparative advantage in the labor intensive good. What kind of things? Maybe textile? So you will export textile and you will import any automobiles from country A, right? This is our basic classical comparative advantage theory. But now, in order to produce iPhone, and what kind of feature of iPhone based on our basic classical trade theory? Is it labor intensive or is it capital intensive? We cannot say that because making iPhone is really capital intensive when you have marketing or design process of step. But if you start to manufacture any of intermediate good or the final good of iPhone, it is really capital intensive. Right? So, who export iPhone and who import iPhone? We cannot determine that. Everyone is making iPhone, so they are exporting a part of iPhone and they are importing the other part of iPhone. So this is the main concept of vertical integration of each other. With this iPhone market, all the countries are integrated in one process, one chain. So it is called the supply chain. So based on this, from our competitive advantage, this is one supply chain from natural resources to making final good. This whole process within only one country, and they will export this capital intensive good. But now in iPhone, from the beginning to the final part, this part is going to United States, this part is going to maybe Canada, this part going to South Korea, and this part going to China, and this part going to Japan. So we can participate in this supply chain, this global supply chain or global value chain only in this part. So we are having some minor part of making iPhone, But iPhone is partly made by South Korea. It is partly made by the United States. It is partly made by China or Japan. So we cannot define the nationality or the origin of export of this iPhone. So we definitely, technically, on the paper, regard iPhone as importing good because we are importing this iPhone from the other country, right? And Samsung Galaxy S is called domestic good. But more than 90% of making process of Samsung Galaxy S is made out of South Korea. So this is concept of the global value chain or the vertical integration. So we can apply this normal traditional comparative advantage theory to our newly observed supply chain. So the owner of iPhone, the Apple, is American company, right? So if you really want to talk about the nationality of this iPhone, there's only one way you can talk, because the owner of iPhone or the main producer or the main role player of making this iPhone is company named Apple. And we know that this Apple is based on the United States. So we can say that iPhone looks like American product, so we can import this iPhone from the United States, but it is totally wrong. Because we are also a part of making iPhone, along with China, Vietnam, Japan, and the other countries. So all these countries are integrated inside iPhone production chain, supply chain. So the new theory is definitely needed to interpret this phenomenon, not actually or the other comparative theory. Does it make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks so much. Good question. Okay. Any other questions? No. All right. So it looks pretty much complicating to me to understand why globalization is not so simple. And to me, I need to have more analytical tools to understand why this globalization is pretty much complicated to fully understand. Because without this concept, GVC or the vertical integration, it is still in fact that the connectivity between countries is now getting closer to each other. When you borrow some money from the bank, you need to repay some interest, right? It is called interest rate. And the Korean interest rate is heavily influenced by the central bank monetary policy. And Bank of Korea, the central bank of South Korea, is determining the policy rate, policy interest rate, and this policy interest rate determined by the Korean central bank is heavily influenced by the Fed, the United States central bank. Why? Because financial markets of South Korea is heavily connected to the financial markets of the United States. So if there are so much gaps between South Korea and the United States in terms of interest rate, there will be huge capital inflow or outflows between those countries, and it will harm the stability of the financial markets of the both countries. So it is called the trilemma. You don't have to know about that, so even you don't have to write down this one. Trilemma of international finance. This is pretty much a popular and a famous phenomenon in international finance literature that it cannot be called at once between the three factors: free capital movement, fixed exchange rate, and independent monetary policy. You will study about this trilemma when you take international finance course, but you don't have to worry about this one right now for this class. But with this example, we can smack kinds of taste that the strengthening of connectivity between countries in terms of financial market or internet trade market. One good example is that our history of crisis. Do you guys remember the 2008 global financial crisis when you were a teenager or something? So your memory will be a little vague or a little bit murky, but I certainly remember the situations of this 2008 global financial crisis because this was the first year I came to the United States for my study at the graduate level. So when I was first year in my PhD course, this global financial crisis happened. So all the markets, all the bigger malls or department stores or the other clothing shops had really heavy sales, like 50% to 70% of sale at almost all malls in the United States. So that was pretty good chance for me or the other poor graduate students to buy some luxury goods or luxury clothes at really cheaper prices. But the problem is that income that I had from the university was also cut by half or something. So my real income was almost not changing. Even all the prices, inflation or the other prices of goods and services in the States has fallen by half or something. And as we may study about the origin of this global financial crisis later in this chapter, it is definitely from the United States. Long story short, the main reason of this global financial crisis was a kind of lazy bankers. Some bankers lent their big money to less qualified borrowers, like some resident in Miami. Have you ever been in Miami? No? Miami is a good city. It's kind of city of festivals, city of beer, and city of alcohol. Everyone was pretty much laid back and a little bit lazy. And there were so much money flowing in the city of Miami, even if the borrower, the resident in the Miami, are not the regular workers. They are mostly temporary jobs, so they can be cut for any days if they are too lazy. But the small bankers in the region of Miami gave them a lot of money without the serious credit check or serious kinds of investigations about each borrowers. And they mixed up with more healthy financial goods credited by the government or government institution. So they mixed up. So any of financial consumers cannot determine this mixed version of financial good is qualified or less qualified or something. So this is a kind of financial market engineering technique. It is really hard to explain, especially in English, because it is really tough to understand even. So this mixed version of financial good with less qualified Miami resident borrowing money and some good qualified government issued or government backed mortgage or something, this mixed financial good were mostly exported to the European continent. The biggest buyers of this American financial good was Ireland, Portugal, and China. So financial markets really globalized. And some bankruptcy happened. Some Miami resident was fired by their company. That's normal, right? But if the business cycle went down a little bit, then there would be the more guys who got fired by their companies. And if this phenomenon is happening in small region, then that small banker who mostly gave money to those kinds of guys will definitely bankrupt as well. And this bank was connected to the bigger banker, then this bigger banker was also bankrupt because they cannot get back some money from this smaller banker. Then the biggest bank in the United States also bankrupt, like Citi or the Lehman Brothers, maybe AIG. These kinds of the big money guys are also having some trouble. So this is kind of the origin of this global financial crisis. But the thing is that this small resident problem in the Miami not a big city in the United States. They are maybe 10th or 15th biggest city in the United States. So the local power of influence of Miami would be pretty much smaller than the New York or California or maybe Chicago. But with some bankruptcies happened in the city of Miami, was spread out to the rest of the world. So Ireland, Greece, Portugal, Spain, they were all the trouble in the upcoming next year. Maybe South Korea had a lot of troubles as well because South Korean financial markets were heavily connected to the United States and the European continent. So if those two biggest continents in the world having some trouble, then the rest of the world will definitely get sick together. So the examples of global financial crisis and the 2009 the sovereign debt crisis in the European Eurozone were pretty good reason and pretty good example to think about the heavy connectivity or the too much connectivity between regions or countries. And this high level of connectivity between countries or the region, the biggest problem of this phenomenon is that if one country having trouble and these kinds of risk can be easily transmitted to the other countries without tackling by policymakers, because the speed of this contagion was so fast and the volume of this risk was so big that any single government cannot defend their country from these kinds of risks by themselves. They need to cooperate with each other between countries, but it takes a lot of time because they need to decide the time of meeting and they need to discuss about the issue and they need to find out some solution. They need to find out some technical solutions in detail. It takes a lot of time. But at the time of doing this kind of everything, risk is already there and the contagion is already happening. Financial market is already burning out and the volatility is getting really high. So this risk contagion or risk transmission is so fast and so strong. So the main problem or the main player of this risk transmission is too high level of connectivity between countries. So we need to stress out this issue for sure in any time of this class, in this semester. And this is one of the reasons why we should study about the current issues that are strongly related to these kinds of background knowledge. We definitely will have some issues that is pretty much correlated with this issue or these kinds of knowledge, and we'll discuss about this issue in detail with the perspective of some economic background knowledge. Okay, any question? It's pretty tough. You know, speaking English is really tough for most of Korean. And I have no idea what I'm talking about. Right, so I picked up 3 or 4 main issues that we would like to study together in this semester. And I hope everyone, not everyone, but most of you guys like my picks, but you can definitely suggest me in the other direction. Suggest me to discuss about, or at least consider about the kinds of issues you are mostly interested in, and we definitely consider about it as our main candidate of discussion, for sure. So my first pick to be discussed in this semester is definitely globalization. But in this time, thanks to President Donald Trump and maybe some dumb British guys who made some Brexit situation, the fragmentation is another way of thinking that you should definitely consider about. There will definitely strengthen advantages between markets of this country and that country, but also the protectionism has been rising up in recent days. So we can see these examples of protectionism in everywhere, like China versus United States, Russia versus Ukraine, or maybe United Kingdom versus the European continent. These kinds of protectionism or the fragmentation resulted in some regionalism. So I told you the concept of supply chain. Until the trade conflict between the China and the United States, there was only one supply chain in the world. For instance, iPhone. iPhone is made by many countries, and the supply chain of iPhone was just one, from the United States to the China, to the Japan, to the Netherlands. But as time goes by, China started thinking about, why not us? Why don't we make our own supply chain to exclude our rival, the United States, and the other westernized countries? So now the supply chain going to be separated by two parts. One part, US and each French, and the other part, China and each French. So they are getting more and more separated each other. So there are two different supply chains. For instance, if we think about the semiconductor supply chain, United States has their own supply chain with allies such as Japan, Korea, or Taiwan. But China is starting making their own supply chain of the semiconductor market. So they invited India because India has so much brilliant guys in making the good semiconductor supply chain belt, or the Russia, or the South Africa, or maybe Brazil, some more socialist countries. So how about the South Korea? South Korea is leaning to the United States because in the political economy things, Korea is closer to the United States in many ways, but now we are on the fork in the road. We need to decide which direction we should go. We should still stick with the United States and stick with the supply chain made by the United States, the original traditional supply chain. For instance, if we decide to continue producing semiconductor, or should we go to China and the new supply chain because it's more attractive, it's getting cheaper production cost, and regionally they are closer to the South Korea. So now we need to decide which direction our industry or our country is going to, United States or China. So this is the main issue of the fragmentation or the regionalization issue. And some kinds of cultural issue is also inside this one. I don't know about the religion, I don't know about some cultural maybe context or background because I'm not expert about that. But definitely there were so many issues based on cultural difference between countries and between some regions. And this one was also one of the main players in making this regionalization or the fragmentation. And we need to talk about this issue. At first, and my second issue to bring out to this table is definitely post-pandemic situation. Pandemic is over, right? Most of COVID-19 pandemic is becoming to the endemic situation. So we treat pandemic as the same thing like the flu or some cold, even in some countries. But this pandemic, the 2 years of pandemic left us so many structural changes in the perspective of economics. The first good example is the inflation. We are experiencing too high inflation right now, and this inflation is even historical, which means that we haven't seen this level of inflation in the last 60 years in any country. So this is pretty much unprecedented or really historical event right now, and as a macroeconomist, I have never seen this high level of inflation in any part of my life. So we need to definitely talk about why this uneven situation of inflation is happening and it is still persistent, and what kind of things are the main factors in determining this level of inflation in current days. So we need to definitely talk about it. And many economists already studied about that, fortunately, so we can just adapt their idea and we can determine, okay, so this was a pretty good point of view, and the other one, I don't agree with that, we can determine that. With the same time span during the pandemic, we experienced asset market boom in many countries, including Australia, South Korea, maybe Vancouver in Canada, or San Francisco in the United States. Their prices of housing doubled up or even tripled up. So it became unmanageable for most of residents. And definitely the bust came after. Bust means that you should borrow big money to buy really expensive house, but after 6 months, the market price of your house helped out, but your debt is remained the same, so you need to repayment your debt for your life, but you cannot sell your house at the same price you bought, so your life sucks and your life is getting worse. So this is asset market boom bust situation, and it is happening in the most of countries, and it definitely jeopardized many people in many countries. So we need to definitely think about it. With these two really negative influences of economic phenomena, we definitely think about some possibility of economic recession. China is already going into the recession because China experienced the heaviest asset market boom and bust situation here. They even didn't have any inflation because their asset market bust was so heavy, so even they didn't have any inflation in recent days. So China is getting more attention negatively by many policymakers and economists, and they are really worried about the real possibility of economic crisis in China, maybe next 6 months or a year. And without China, there are also some smaller countries already experiencing really hard situation. Maybe Turkey, maybe Argentina, or the other South American countries. They are already having some trouble. Yeah, I still call Turkey as Turkey, not Turkey, because I hate the kinds of newly changing name. I hate Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, and he changed the nation's name by himself because he wanted it to go back to the kind of historical period of Turkey. But still, the United States, Japan, or the other advanced countries call this country as Turkey. We know that this Turkey is not a bird, right? So it's natural to call this country Turkey. So in order to protect our own country from any possibility of economic recession, we need to spend more money from the government side. So extreme fiscal stimulus has been the main issue for the main advanced countries, but it is also a fact that we cannot spend money for life because we need to collect some tax revenue to spend our fiscal expenditure. But if economic situation is going down and down again, our possible tax revenue is also going down, which means that we don't have enough money to spend more money for the people from the government side. So there is increasing public debt because the tax revenue going down while fiscal support is still needed for some poorer people, like some people in trouble with asset market bust, or during the 2 years of pandemic, many small and medium-sized enterprises were in the crisis because the service industry was almost dying during the 2 year span of pandemic. So there were a lot of money spent to these kinds of people from the fiscal side of government. But as tax revenue is going down, they don't have enough money, and their level of public debt is going up. So the fiscal crisis and maybe some more economic crisis from the asset market. So this is kind of financial crisis. So those two different possibilities of crisis are both rising up. So this is a main worrisome situation from the macroeconomist view. So we need to talk about these current kinds of possibility of crisis for sure. And if we have enough time, then we can talk about a little bit of more potential risk in the financial market. So this word, a term, the secular stagnation, may not be familiar to most of you guys. So let me explain a little bit more about that. So this is GDP, the world GDP. So roughly saying, before 2008 financial crisis, our world GDP growth rate was like this. But after 2008 financial crisis up to now, our growth rate of world GDP is going like this. So our potential growth path was here, but our actual line is here. We are still growing. Our world GDP is still growing up, but it is growing more slowly than our expectation. We expected to grow a little faster than now, but after 2008 financial crisis, the overall growth rate of the world economy is getting slower and slower again. So this is kind of ongoing problem of world economy because we lost a part of engine for our growth. We lost some momentum of growing our economy. And the biggest problem is that we still don't know why. Many policymakers and many macroeconomists have been trying their best to solve this problem, this ongoing problem, but we still didn't find out any origin of this ongoing problem, like a flu that never left my body. So this is called the secular stagnation problem. And if we have really enough time for more discussion, then it will be the most interesting issue to me personally. So I would like to talk about some possibility of cooperation of the cryptocurrency. Maybe some of you guys already lost a lot of money from this Bitcoin or something, but still there is some hopes that the monetary system will successfully adopt the newly developed technology of the cryptocurrency into their own system, so we can minimize our social cost while we can maximize the social benefit from this new system. So we need to talk about a little bit if you're interested. If you're not interested, then just forget about this. Right, so the last part is my recommendation how to study these issues. Just my personal recommendation. So it may be helpful, but it may not be helpful if you already know about this kind of way of studying. So if you are very interested in studying some current issues of world economy, reading policy reports published by some good global institution is a good way of starting. Because IMF, OECD, maybe World Bank, or maybe Asian Development Bank, these global institution, organization will provide the most insightful but less difficult content of how world economy is going well and which part is probably pretty much problematic, and they think this one may be our solution or something. So they provided a lot of graphs and tables that can definitely help you in understanding, but they hate some jargon or some difficult concept or words, so they will provide easier explanations about current issues, but they may lack some academic depth of insight. They will not provide much detailed version of insight on each issue, but it is really easy to understand and maybe most helpful at your level of understanding. If you don't understand some core concept already mentioned in the policy report, then you can go to your library and open up your textbook. So this is your most reliable guide. So it is really excellent for grasping terminology, concept, or basic economic principles, but it lacks some current issues or some up-to-date version of covering every issues that are happening right now. to overcome the limitations of textbook, you can definitely go to the academic papers. And I know that most of undergraduate students are afraid of reading academic papers because they think they are not at the same level of academic papers version, the difficulty of understanding. It is definitely challenging because they will have a lot of jargon, a lot of maybe mathematical approach, maybe their graph or numbers are pretty much difficult to interpret, but it has the biggest and the deepest insight of specific issues. So if you want to get some real knowledge at the academic field, then you should definitely go to the academic papers to read about that. At least you can just try to do that. After studying by yourself or with me, the one thing remaining at the last part, how to interpret that current issues. Interpreting or the academic interpretation about some current issues that were happening around your world is very important because you are the social scientist. So the basic way or the easiest way to think about how to interpret is that you can read your newspaper. But newspaper does not give you some detailed version of insight. That's a limitation of the newspapers. But it will definitely give you the most current issues that is pretty much important and it is widely discussed by many policymakers. So you can definitely start with reading the newspaper. Then you can formulate your own questions that are not mentioned in the newspaper. Newspaper has their own point of view. So you don't have to follow their point of view. You don't have to follow their own opinion. But you can think about whether the newspaper's opinion is right or wrong, or you can decide their point of view is biased or not. With this process of thinking, you can raise up your own questions. So raising a question is a good starting point for understanding some specific issue. If you don't have any question, then you're almost dead with this issue. You don't have to look at this issue anymore. So raising up your own question, and even if you cannot answer your question for the first time, it doesn't matter because this is pretty good starting point to think about further with more materials and more maybe consultation with the professor. So raising up by your question, that should be creative enough, which means that there should not be mentioned about the point of views from the newspaper. It will be a pretty good start point. Then you can go back to textbook to get more detailed knowledge to support your idea. After raising up your question, then you may have kinds of initial idea or initial thought about solving this question. And you need to doubt yourself. You need your own opinion, definitely doubt about it. And having the better solution, you need to go back to textbook to establish your own kinds of analytical tools from more agreed idea from the economist. Then you can definitely go back to the academic papers to deepen your analytical skills to get the better insight about current issues. And most of the steps, you will do that by me. You will do that with my support or assistant. So even if you are pretty much afraid of doing all of these things by yourself, don't worry about it because I'll be there. I'll definitely help you. Just man to man, one by one. Because we have smaller group size, maybe less than 15 guys. So I can support each of you. So you can definitely make some consultation. Then I will give you more detailed and personalized version of materials so that you can utilize the kinds of materials to strengthen your idea to find out the solutions. Okay. All right, that's it. Any questions? Yeah, this is kind of introduction section. Before going to the details of each policy papers published by some good international organizations. So maybe in the next time we'll start to review some notable policy papers published by OECD or World Bank or maybe IMF, so we can get some basic idea from the policy report to develop our own idea of how to solve the current issues problem and what are our policy response or what are kinds of solutions from our real life side or something like that. Okay. Any questions? No. Okay. Thanks so much, bro, guys, for having me, and we'll see you on the Thursday afternoon.